The 2024 monster horror film, Arcadian, starring Nicolas Cage. Here comes the thriller. This film could be described as an enhanced version of A Quiet Place, with even more explosive monster designs. The story is set in a future world where human development has drastically worsened Earth's environment, giving birth to a terrifying type of monster. Their appearance brings the world to the brink of destruction, seemingly as nature's punishment for humanity. Fortunately, these monsters have a deadly weakness. They fear sunlight and can only operate at night. This allows humanity to avoid extinction. Among the few survivors in this apocalypse, Paul discovers a pair of infants while on the run. Being kind-hearted, he adopts these two babies, living by the rule of leaving at sunrise and returning at sunset. The trio lives peacefully for 15 years on a farm in the suburbs, with the two children now grown up. Every time night falls, they close their doors and windows to prevent monster attacks. However, they can't let their guard down, as being indoors doesn't guarantee safety. Tonight, the dog suddenly becomes agitated, as if it senses danger. This unusual behavior immediately alerts the three of them. Thomas had just taken a lantern to check the first floor when there was a loud banging on the door outside. Paul quickly rushes to brace the door. Thomas, recovering his senses, also hurries to help, and the two dare not slacken in the slightest. Fortunately, after holding out for a while, things finally calm down outside. After peering through the door gap and confirming the monster has left, Paul finally breathes a sigh of relief. During this time, Joseph wasn't idle. As the most intellectually adept of the trio, he noticed a certain pattern in the monster's attacks, as there were 3 consecutive attacks. Each attack lasted different durations: 10 seconds, 20 seconds, and 1 second. Joseph analyzed that the first attack seemed to be a probe, while the second was a genuine attempt to break in. The last attack appeared to be an act of frustration after failing to achieve its goal. He deduced that these monsters seemed to have evolved intelligence. Unlike before, the claw marks left on the door reveal the terror of the monsters. It seems today's task is to reinforce the door, but before that, there's an even more important task: teaching the two children how to drive an off-road vehicle. Because food at home is running low, today they must venture out to find supplies themselves. But just after learning to drive, Thomas decides to leave alone, as usual heading to the neighboring farm, not planning to go out with his brother. But this time, Paul does not agree, as he needs to stay home to reinforce the door and can't let Joseph go alone. Reluctantly, Thomas has to get in his brother's car. However, Paul doesn't know that halfway there, Thomas gets out of the car. He agrees to meet Joseph here before sunset, then turns and runs toward the farm. Joseph, witnessing his brother's behavior, can only silently drive away. It turns out there are also survivors on the farm, and Thomas's purpose here is to be a handyman, all because he's taken a liking to the farmer's daughter, Charlotte, and comes here to work daily to get close to her. Charlotte sees Thomas's intentions and also feels attracted to this handsome, sunny boy. The two quickly establish a relationship. Joseph, on the other hand, who was looking for supplies alone, was miserable, and still ran into a lot of trouble along the way. After finally finding some supplies and preparing to head home, he discovers the car won't start. With the sun about to set, Joseph becomes frantic. Finally, after countless attempts, he manages to start the engine and hurries to the meeting point. At the same time, Thomas, deep in his romance, forgets the time. When he realizes it's already evening, he can't bear to say goodbye to his new girlfriend and runs home. Realizing his brother might have already left, he opts to take a shortcut and run. Unfortunately, when Joseph drives to the agreed spot, he doesn't see Thomas. Thinking his brother has already gone home, Joseph also decides to leave. But upon returning home, he sees his father anxiously running out. Clearly, his brother hasn't returned, and Joseph has to tell everything. Paul immediately realizes Thomas is in trouble and instructs Joseph to stay home and lock the doors and windows. He ventures out alone with the dog to search. As night falls, Paul finds no trace of Thomas. Fortunately, Thomas, who fell into a crevice, is unharmed and quickly gets up. Realizing his predicament, Thomas uses his lighter to find a way out. But the feared event happens. A monster suddenly scares Thomas, causing him to fall. However, he doesn't wait passively. He takes out a knife and attacks the monster. Unexpectedly, another monster grabs Thomas from behind. Luckily, his father arrives in time to help in this critical moment. After dealing with the monsters, Paul doesn't scold his son for disobedience but first asks if he's injured. Learning he's only scared, Paul finally relaxes. But with monsters now active, they decide to stay put and wait for daylight. For safety, the two blocked the only hole, but soon after, Paul heard an unusual noise. Removing a stone, he found a monster outside. Indeed, expecting the monsters to break in through the hole. I didn't expect them to dig a hole directly in the ground. Paul quickly took out some dynamite and placed it at the exit, ready to blow up the tunnel to prevent them from entering. But the monster suddenly grabbed his hand, and in a desperate move, Paul detonated the dynamite. Meanwhile, Joseph, alone at home, seeing the two hadn't returned, decided to close the door and prepare for rest. But he didn't lock the latch fully. Sure enough, just after Joseph closed his eyes, a strange noise came from outside. A monster opened the door, and then a claw stretched in. Joseph, fast asleep, was completely unaware of the danger. Seeing it couldn't reach its prey, the monster extended its retracted arm. Unexpectedly, the fully extended arm was incredibly long, but that wasn't the most terrifying part. Its nails could also stretch at will. Failing to catch its prey, the monster didn't give up. It opened the door latch and entered the house directly, but the next second, all this turned out to be a trap set by Joseph. His goal was to capture a monster to study their habits, but after he finished everything and opened the door, he found that dawn had already broken, and his father and brother still hadn't returned. He sensed something was seriously wrong. He hurriedly drove the off-road vehicle out to search. At the same time, Thomas, having survived, struggled out of the ruins. The explosion didn't take his father, but it severely injured him, causing him to lose consciousness completely. Fortunately, Joseph had already met up with the dog, and with its guidance, he finally found his brother. The two managed to carry their father into the car and quickly brought him back home. After quickly bandaging their father's wounds, Thomas discovered the monster Joseph had captured last night. Thinking of how the monster nearly killed them last night, an angry Thomas decided to take out his frustration on the caged monster. Ignoring Joseph's protests, he forcefully opened the cage. The monster, indeed very afraid of sunlight, immediately hid under the bed, but then the dog ran in, barking wildly. Feeling threatened, the monster had to attack, but exposed to the light, it became very weak. Its speed and strength greatly diminished, and Joseph quickly subdued it. Eventually, Thomas killed it with an axe. Joseph had no choice but to dissect the corpse to study their internal structure. However, Thomas then noticed their father's condition was worsening. Without timely medical treatment, they might lose their dad at any moment. Thomas suggested going to the farm for help, where they had better facilities and medicine, but Joseph said this was a waste of time, as he was sure the farm wouldn't help them. After all, in these apocalyptic times, medicine is scarcer than food, and no one would help a stranger for no reason. But despite the slim chances, Thomas decided to try his luck for their father's sake. The two once again carried their father onto the off-road vehicle and immediately went to the neighboring farm. As Joseph guessed, the people at the farm immediately closed the big gate when they saw the two brothers arriving. Learning of Thomas's family's plight, Charlotte's parents didn't hesitate to refuse. After all, they already had limited supplies and no extra medicine to treat their father. Charlotte wanted to plead for Thomas but was stopped by her mother. However, for their daughter's sake, they were still willing to give Thomas temporary shelter. With one less mouth to feed, Joseph would have more supplies to help their father through this ordeal. Joseph could only turn away silently after hearing this, and Thomas, unlikely to be left alone, chose to follow. This angered Thomas. He said if Thomas wasn't always running to the farm and neglecting his family, their father wouldn't have ended up like this trying to save him. Thomas pushed his brother to the ground with a punch, and the two brothers parted on bad terms. Joseph left with their father, while Thomas still chose to enter the farm, but he wouldn't neglect his father and brother. His actual purpose was to steal medicine for his father's treatment. However, Charlotte caught him in the act. Faced with Thomas's plea, Charlotte's heart softened. She secretly took the medicine behind her father's back and gave it to him. Unbeknownst to them, the dialogue between the two had been heard by the people outside the house. Just as Thomas was about to leave with the life-saving medicine, he, armed with a spray gun, blocked his path. He was warned to hand over what he had, and facing the threat, Thomas had no choice but to comply. However, the people on the farm were not willing to stop there. They took Thomas to a warehouse and tied him up, planning to break his leg as punishment for being a liar and a thief. Despite Thomas's desperate screams, it was to no avail, but an accident happened just as they were about to pull the trigger. The suddenly collapsing ground made him fall down, and his companion who came to check was dragged away by the monster inside. Charlotte's parents were woken by the noise in their sleep. Rose was just about to go out to inspect when he was pounced upon by the sudden appearance of the monster. Misses. Rose runs out of the house in fear, but is stopped by another monster that arrives. It was only then that Charlotte noticed something was wrong, but she had just stepped out of the room with the oil lamp when she saw a long trail of blood that ended at her tragically dead mother. Meanwhile, the warehouse was also in chaos. Monsters that emerged from the ground launched a fierce attack on the people there. Thomas, tied up, begged for help to be untied, but everyone was too busy saving themselves to pay him any attention. Some people who managed to run out found the outside even more dangerous. In a desperate situation, Thomas had to choose self-rescue. He frantically smashed the wooden boards to free himself, but just as he was about to escape, a monster targeted him. It turned out that Charlotte arrived just in time. They had to leave immediately. Before leaving, Thomas didn't forget to take the medicine from the table. As they walked out of the warehouse, the entire farm was completely unrecognizable. Apart from them, everyone else had unfortunately become the prey of the monsters. On the other side, Joseph was horrified to find that the monsters had somehow hollowed out the floor. He had just used furniture to block the hole when an unusual noise came from outside. Joseph, wielding a hammer, cautiously checked, only to see the door suddenly opened by something. Then a hand stretched in from outside. It was Thomas and Charlotte running over from the farm. Seeing this, Joseph hurriedly opened the door to let them in. He then immediately administered the medicine they brought back to their father. Gradually, Paul regained consciousness and woke up. But with the floor dug through, the place was clearly no longer safe. The monsters would undoubtedly attack them tonight. Joseph didn't know what to do at the moment, but Paul said just 2 words.
Hide.
Encouraged by their father, Joseph immediately took action with the two, preparing for the imminent danger. First, they piled up miscellaneous items in the room, then poured gasoline over them. Finally, they tied a lit cigar to the dynamite, creating a makeshift timed bomb trap. Just then, the monsters in the hole began to stir, but luckily their plan was just 1 step away from completion. However, at this moment, Paul walked out of the room. He went straight forward, took the spray gun from Charlotte's hand, and then decisively shot several times at the floor. The broken floor could hinder the monster's movement, and Joseph and the others were ready for the explosion. Soon, a large group of monsters appeared at the end of the corridor. Paul, holding his stick, faced them alone. The next second, a monster charged at him. Just after dealing with one monster, the rest of the large group surged forward. Luckily, the pre-broken boards caused them to fall down, but this was only a temporary measure. Paul knew the monsters would attack again soon. So, taking advantage of the others' distraction, he decisively locked the door from the outside, sacrificing himself to buy time for his sons. At that moment, the timed trap was finally triggered. The 3 could only tearfully hide in the fridge. As the large group of monsters rushed over, the bomb exploded. After a fierce explosion, the 3 hiding in the fridge miraculously survived. They desperately dug through the rubble, praying their father was alive like last time, but they only found the monsters that were not quite dead yet. Unexpectedly, the monster's vitality was so strong that the 3 had to give up the search and hurriedly drive away. However, the burning monsters gathered together and chased after them. Charlotte's spray gun couldn't stop their advance. Fortunately, these monsters were also at their last gasp. Under the scorching flames, they didn't last long before completely disintegrating into ashes. Only at dawn did the 3 dare to stop the car. The monster attack not only made them lose their home but also their closest loved ones. But the apocalypse wouldn't end because of this. The 3 could only muster their spirits, driving the car to find a new homeland.